So everybody's talking about trade wars and trade deficits. What do people get wrong about trade deficit?
I wrote a piece actually on my LinkedIn blog a few weeks ago called "My Trade Deficit with Costco." I think it's a good way of looking at this. I run a trade deficit with Costco. I buy a lot of their stuff. They don't seem to want to buy what I have to sell, which is basically investment insight. But I run a trade deficit with almost everybody. I run a trade deficit with Whole Foods. I run a trade deficit with CVS. The only people that I run a trade surplus with are JPMorgan Chase, my employer. But that's actually okay. Because overall, I run a trade surplus, and I don't really care who I run the trade deficit with. So I think that's the first thing. You know, we focus on, well, we've got a real problem with China, or we've got a problem with Germany. It doesn't matter. So long as overall we run a trade surplus, we wouldn't have a problem. But of course we don't. But then that gets to the second point. You know, why do I run a trade deficit with Costco, or why do people get into problems in which they're buying a lot of things from one group and not selling them? It's because I overspend. And as a nation, we overspend. The reason we have a trade deficit is actually because we have a budget deficit. If you think about it this way, you've got the private sector, you've got the public sector, you've got trade. If the private sector more or less pays its way, if we fund our investment through our savings, but if the government runs a big budget deficit, if it spends a whole pile more than it's taking in taxes, then we as a nation will live beyond our means. I think this is so important. It's not a matter of tariffs. It's not a matter of the dollar. If we run a big trade budget deficit, if we continue to buy more stuff the government does and it takes it in taxes, we will run a trade deficit. So if we want to fix our trade problem, we've got to start by fixing the budget deficit.
And to take your analogy further, when is it okay to run a budget deficit or a trade deficit as an individual or a nation?
It's actually a very good point, because now I suppose I do overall I run a trade surplus, and that's good. But 20 or 30 years ago, when I was a younger man, I actually ran a trade deficit. I was borrowing money every year just to fund my expeditions to Costco because I wasn't getting paid enough. But that's okay, because I knew that over time I'd get paid more. And that's actually true for example, emerging market economies. It's okay for them to borrow a whole pile of money to grow their economies because they're young. They've got plenty of room to grow. We are an old, mature economy. Our economic growth is going to be about 2% in the long run. In this kind of economy, and with so many people retiring, we actually should be running a budget surplus and a trade surplus. We should be storing up money to pay for our retirement. And of course, we're doing exactly the opposite.